Pink Floyd, 1979. Roger Waters basically tells co-founder Richard Wright, "You're done. Leave the band or Roger takes the wall and finishes the thing without him." Now hold up. Rick didn't join Pink Floyd after they got famous. He helped start the damn band. He was there before Dark Side of the Moon, before the giant tours, before Pink Floyd needed enough equipment to invade a small country. And now, he's being shown the door. Rick wasn't exactly Employee of the Month during The Wall either. His marriage was coming apart, he wasn't as involved as everybody wanted him to be, and David Gilmour later admitted Rick wasn't pulling his weight. So Roger didn't just wake up Tuesday morning and decide, you know who I can't stand today? The keyboard player. There were real problems here. But Roger's way of solving problems had all the subtlety of throwing somebody's clothes onto the front lawn. Producer Bob Ezrin watched this mess up close and later described Rick as a victim of Roger's almost Teutonic cruelty, which is a very classy British rock way of saying Roger was being a hard-ass. Rick finally resigned, and just like that, one of the guys who helped build Pink Floyd was no longer in Pink Floyd. Except here's where this thing gets ridiculous. They still needed him. The Wall had to go on tour, and Rick knew that music inside and out, so they called him back, not as a member, but as an employee. Man, imagine starting a company, getting fired from it, then they call you Thursday because nobody knows the password. That's basically where Rick was. Same band, same keyboards, same songs, except now he's collecting a paycheck like somebody they brought in through a staffing agency. And that little detail ends up making the whole thing even crazier because the Wall tour cost a fortune. Massive production, giant sets, crew everywhere. That Wall wasn't building itself, and apparently neither were the profit margins. The actual members were responsible for the losses. Rick wasn't. He was on salary. So while everybody else was watching money disappear, the guy who'd just been pushed out of Pink Floyd was sitting there getting paid. The fired guy made money while the bosses got the bill. You have to appreciate that just a little bit.
By the time we'd come to do The Wall in 1980, Roger had begun to believe that he was the Pink Floyd. He began to believe that he was
The leader.
the leader, but more than that, that others, we weren't necessary. And that is why I left. By this time, Roger was on his ego trip, and we didn't get on for some time, for maybe 3 or 4 years before that. He simply said, I don't want Rick to be in the band anymore. And I had no choice because he said, basically, if you don't leave, I'm going to take The Wall, which is recorded as a Pink Floyd record, and you do it myself.
By 1983, they released the final cut, and Rick isn't on it. Not one note. It's the only Pink Floyd studio album without him. He tries moving on and eventually forms a project called Z. That record comes out and, yeah, let's just say nobody was camping outside the record store. Then Roger leaves Pink Floyd himself, and this is where the whole thing starts smelling like irony. David and Nick Mason want to keep the band going. Roger says no. As far as he's concerned, Pink Floyd is finished without him. And then the lawyers get involved. Because nothing says rock and roll like paperwork. Roger goes to court trying to stop David and Nick from continuing under the Pink Floyd name. Now think about this. A few years earlier, Rick was basically told, Pink Floyd can survive without you. Then Roger leaves and suddenly it's, Pink Floyd can't survive without me. That's a hell of a change in company policy. The legal fight eventually gets settled. David keeps Pink Floyd going, and then, in 1987, Rick comes back. Not all the way, though. The agreements from when he left were still hanging around, so on a momentary lapse of reason, he's back working with Pink Floyd, but still basically on the payroll. But he's in the room again, and little by little, he starts getting his spot back. By the division bell in 1994, Rick isn't some hired keyboard player anymore. He's writing, he's singing, and his name is back in the credits where people remember seeing it. He even sings lead on Wearing the Inside Out. 15 years after getting pushed out, he's standing inside Pink Floyd again. Then comes Live 8 in 2005. Roger, David, Rick, Nick. All 4 of them together on one stage for one night. And somehow, nobody needed a lawyer standing next to the drum riser. For a few minutes, all that old garbage disappeared. Rick played one final time with David and Nick in 2007 at the Syd Barrett tribute, and nobody knew that would be it. Rick died the next year. David later talked about how gentle and private Rick was, and how nobody really played like him. And people can still feel this story today, because everybody knows somebody this has happened to. You spend 20 years helping build the place. You know how everything works. You helped create what everybody else is making money from. And then one day, somebody higher up decides you're not part of the future. Security shuts off your badge. Your name disappears from the email chain. Then 6 months later, they're calling you back as a contractor because the new guy can't figure out the system. That's Rick Wright. He helped build Pink Floyd's sound. They pushed him out. Then they paid him to come back because they still needed what he did. And after Roger left, Rick was the one who found his way back into Pink Floyd. And Rick Wright's story has one more twist, because one of the biggest pieces of music he ever wrote ended up having its own fight over who actually deserved credit. The Great Gig in the Sky. Rick had the music, that beautiful piano, all that space around it, but something was missing. Pink Floyd wanted a voice on top of it, and engineer Alan Parsons knew a 25-year-old session singer named Claire Torrey who might be able to do something with it. Claire wasn't some huge star walking into Abbey Road. She was doing session work because she needed the money, and when they first called, she couldn't even make it. She had tickets to see Chuck Berry, which, looking back, is pretty funny. One of the most famous vocals in rock history almost got bumped because Chuck Berry was in town. I can't even argue with that. So Claire comes in the next night, January 21st, 1973. They play her Rick's track and basically tell her they want something emotional over it. That's about all she gets. At first, she tries singing actual words, little soul phrases, baby, and all that. And they're like, nah, that's not it. So Claire changes the whole approach. Instead of thinking like a singer, she starts thinking of her voice like another instrument. And then she lets it rip. Those screams, those bends, that whole damn emotional roller coaster you hear on the record, Claire was improvising it right there in the room. No lyrics in front of her, no melody somebody handed her. She's feeling her way through Rick's chords and creating that vocal as she's going. When she's done, she doesn't walk out thinking she just made rock history either. She actually thinks some of it sounds like screeching and figures they probably won't use much of it.
I was convinced it would never see the light of day because they hadn't commented, they hadn't made any, do you know what I mean? They hadn't said great, awful, nothing.
Pink Floyd wasn't exactly standing there with pom-poms telling her she crushed it. Then she gets paid, £30. That was the Sunday session rate, double her normal £15 fee. £30 for that vocal. There are people paying more than that now to have DoorDash bring them 2 hamburgers. And Claire moves on to the next job. Meanwhile, Dark Side of the Moon comes out and turns into one of those records that basically refuses to leave the planet. And every time The Great Gig in the Sky plays, there she is. Rick gets the songwriting credit, Claire gets credit for singing on it, but she doesn't get credit for actually composing the vocal she'd created. Years later, she admitted that if she'd understood copyright and publishing back then the way she eventually did, she would have handled things very differently. And in 2004, more than 30 years after she walked into Abbey Road for that £30 session, Claire finally did something about it. She sued Pink Floyd and EMI, arguing that what she created that night wasn't just a hired singer performing somebody else's written part. That vocal was her composition. The case was heading toward the high court, but it never got that far. In 2005, they settled out of court. The money and terms stayed private. But one thing didn't stay private. The credit changed. From then on, The Great Gig in the Sky carried both names, Richard Wright and Claire Torrey. 32 years after the record came out, the paperwork finally caught up with what everybody's ears had been telling them the whole time. And there's something almost perfect about putting Rick and Claire's stories together. Rick helped build Pink Floyd and eventually got treated like an employee. Claire walked in as an employee and created something important enough that decades later, she was recognized as one of the writers. People still deal with that crap today. Maybe you designed the logo, came up with the idea, built the system, wrote the hook. whatever it is. They hand you a check, tell you good job, and 20 years later, somebody else is still making money off the thing you created. It's like getting $50 to design the Nike swoosh and finding out later everybody else bought a beach house. Rick Wright and Claire Torrey came at it from opposite directions, but they landed in the same place. Both helped create a sound people couldn't forget, and both found out that in the music business, making something unforgettable and getting your name on the paperwork are two completely different jobs. Sometimes the music lasts forever. The credit just takes a little longer to show up.